This is the vodcast on the carbon-oxygen cycle. You want to write this as your heading before we get started. First of all, just a little bit of a reminder of what carbon and oxygen are. First of all, they're both elements, as you probably learned in previous years. The symbol for the element of carbon is a C, and the symbol for the element of oxygen is an O. Usually we see them in our surroundings as carbon dioxide, so CO2, and oxygen gas, which is O2. So that's what we're going to see most of all. Those are molecules that have carbon and oxygen in them. They are necessary for life, and we'll get into why that is. And they can be found in living, which is, another word for that is biotic, and non-living, another name for which is abiotic forms. Okay, so make sure you write down for sure the difference between a biotic and abiotic thing is that you see, so that you know that living things are biotic and non-living things are abiotic. All right, so what we're going to do is go through all the different types of places that you're going to find carbon and oxygen, how they're found, what form they're found in, and then how they get into that place and how they get out of that place. Now, when we're all done going through all of the different places you find it, we're going to put that all together into the carbon-oxygen cycle so you can see all those places together and how they interact. So the first place we're going to talk about is in the air, the atmosphere. Okay, in this place, they're found as gases. Remember, that's our CO2 and oxygen gas. Okay, so part of the atmosphere is made up of those gases. We're going to focus on the carbon, first of all. Carbon enters the atmosphere through a few different types of processes. They are called combustion, respiration, diffusion, and decomposition. So once you get those written down, I want to kind of go through what some of those things are so that you have a better idea about what we're talking about here. So why don't you take a minute to pause it and write those down, and then we'll discuss some different definitions for those. Okay, the first one we're going to talk about is combustion. All right, combustion is the burning of fossil fuels. So anytime an engine of any sort burns gasoline, that's combustion. So that puts carbon dioxide into the air. So it enters the air through combustion. Second one, respiration. Okay, this is the process that most living organisms go through in order to make energy. Okay, so we're just going to put living, abbreviate here, organisms make energy. This is not like breathing, okay, even though you've learned about the respiratory system and that's breathing. This is completely different. This is something called cellular respiration. This is how we make energy, for example, for our muscles to move. But plants also need this as well, so it's not just in animals. Okay, third one, diffusion from the atmosphere, from the ocean into the atmosphere. Diffusion just means the molecules are moving from one place to another. So we put moving molecules. So if we're talking about diffusing them from the ocean to the air, that means those molecules just naturally move from the ocean to the air. And then finally the last one, decomposition. Okay, decomposition you maybe could just call rotting. Okay, things decomposing. Lots of different organisms do that. We talked about that a little bit already. You know, fungi and bacteria and things like that. So all of those processes put carbon into the air. We do have some processes, though, that take carbon out out of the air. And those processes are photosynthesis and again diffusion into the ocean. Let's just do a quick reminder what photosynthesis is. Photosynthesis is what organisms like plants use to make glucose, which is a type of sugar. So that's how the plants make their food. It's not how they make their energy. Remember, respiration is what they use to make energy. Photosynthesis is what they use to make their food, and this is when they use the sun's energy to make their food. Animals, of course, can get their food by eating other things. Okay, now let's look at the other side of this. The oxygen that's in the atmosphere, how does it get there? Again, photosynthesis. If it takes carbon out of the air, it's going to do the opposite for oxygen. It puts oxygen into the air. Again, we see two other ones we've already talked about for our exits. Respiration and decomposition take oxygen out of the air. Okay, so they actually remove oxygen from the air. So when you make energy, you need to take in oxygen into your body in order to actually go through this process of respiration. Okay, I'm going to move on. If you need to pause it, do it now. Second location we're going to look at is carbon and oxygen in plants. So the carbon and oxygen we see in plants is usually found in that glucose that we just talked about, which is a type of sugar, and in its tissues, so the cells and things inside the plants. How does it get there? Through photosynthesis. So that's how plants get the carbon into their cells. How does it leave? Through respiration and decomposition. Plants decompose. They also need to make energy, so they're giving off carbon dioxide when they do that. How do we get oxygen into plants? Through respiration. Just like we pull in oxygen for respiration, plants also pull in oxygen to use for respiration. Also, when they decompose, those rotting plant tissues pull in oxygen as well. Oxygen can leave the plant through photosynthesis. Okay, again, I'm going to move on, so if you need to pause it to get that written down, go ahead. Third structure we're going to talk about is animals. Where do we have carbon and oxygen in us? Well, we get it through our food. Okay, that's how it gets into us. And it then gets put into our tissues, so in our cells, so in our heart, in our muscle cells, in our skin cells, we have that carbon in there because that came from our food. How do we get it in there? Well, we have to eat stuff. Okay, digestion. So we eat other things to get our carbon. How does it get out? Again, respiration. We breathe out carbon dioxide. When we decompose, we give off carbon dioxide, and our waste products also give off carbon dioxide. Oxygen we bring in through respiration. Also, as we decompose, just like the plants, our tissues suck in oxygen. How do we get rid of oxygen? Again, through waste products. Okay, that's it for that one. I'm going to move on, so you may want to pause. Okay, for the soil, we're getting to the end here. We find carbon in the soil, and this is where we're mostly going to focus here, is on the carbon. You'll notice we don't have an oxygen. Carbon in the soil is found mostly in decomposed organisms, so organisms that still have carbon in them and are slowly rotting away. Also in our fossil fuels. Okay, there's that fossil fuels again. Talked about gasoline, for example. Okay, it's stored carbon. How do we get that carbon into those fossil fuels? It's through decomposition. Okay, so right here. And also, how does it exit? Through that process called combustion, or the burning of fossil fuels, which we talked about before. Okay, I'm going to move on, so you may want to pause. The ocean. I think this is actually supposed to be a number 5. Let's fix that up if we can. Number 5, ocean. In the ocean, carbon is found as a dissolved gas. So again, it's CO2, a gas, but it's dissolved in the water. So kind of like when you open a pop can and it's all fizzy, that's CO2, or carbon dioxide, dissolved in your pop. So the ocean is kind of the same way. It can have dissolved carbon dioxide in it. The process that moves it in and out, so enters and exits, is diffusion. Okay, so this diffusion can cause that carbon dioxide to go back and forth between the air and the ocean. All right. We'll move on to the last part here. We're going to put all these together. So we're starting up here with the air, and you want to draw this out as we go through this, so draw yourself some clouds. They don't have to be beautiful. Okay, from the atmosphere to the ocean, there's our wavy ocean there, we've got diffusion of carbon dioxide back and forth. Okay, so those arrows are showing back and forth from the ocean to the air, constant diffusion of carbon dioxide. We also have some plants on land that can take in carbon dioxide from the air. And remember, that process is called photosynthesis. And they can also give carbon dioxide back to the air. And that process is called respiration. So again, we've got a little nice round cycle here between photosynthesis and respiration, taking up carbon and then putting it back into the atmosphere. Plants, however, can be eaten. Okay, for example, cows will eat grass. There's carbon in that grass because of photosynthesis, so they bring carbon into their body. We call that digestion. Other animals can also eat the cows, like this little boy here eating his meatballs. Okay, that is also called digestion. Okay, again, moving the carbon from the cows to the people. Now, all three of these living organisms, plants, cows, humans, all die eventually and decompose. Remember, that puts the carbon into the soil. Okay, so we're adding all that carbon into the soil when those organisms die and decompose. Plants, animals, both go through respiration, so we already have the trees going through respiration, but now we're going to add that to the humans and the cows as well, putting carbon dioxide into the air. Finally, we're not going to forget about those fossils. Okay, those fossils are dead organisms, so they contain carbon in them. When we dig them up in the form of fossil fuels, because fossil fuels are organisms that have decomposed over millions and millions and millions of years, so we dig up those fossil fuels as oil or coal or something else, and we refine it in a refinery. We can then use it in our vehicles, for example, gasoline, and burn it into the air, process which is called combustion. So take a moment to pause this and make sure you've got all these words and arrows. The pictures don't have to be exactly as I have them. You can sketch them out. But you need to understand this whole cycle all together and how all of these pieces take carbon out of the air or put it into the air. When you're done, this is the last slide, so you can end the podcast.